The Southern Pacific train pulled into Tucson Depot on the afternoon of the 17th of October, 1888, and the woman who stepped down from the second-class carriage was wearing a walking suit in fine brown wool that had been cut, the previous spring, at the Wanamaker Emporium in Philadelphia, and would, by the end of the week, carry the dust of Tanque Verde in every seam. She was 24 years old. She had been a Fellow of Bryn Mawr College since the autumn of 1886, in the Department of Natural Philosophy, under the supervision of Miss M. Carey Thomas, who was then the Dean of the college and would, within 7 years, be its president. She had taken her preliminary examination in Greek translation in the spring of '87. She had entered the institution in its second academic year. The college itself was 3 years old. Its doors had opened in the autumn of 1885, and its first bachelor's class would not graduate for another summer. The dean's letter of recommendation lay folded in the inner pocket of her dispatch case, beside a smaller letter from her mother, and a third, sealed letter from her father's executor that she had not yet opened. She did not own a revolver. She did not, on the afternoon of the 17th of October, know how to fire one. She did, however, know how to identify, under sufficient magnification, the slip composition of a pre-Columbian ceramic vessel, and to distinguish between a piece fired in an open trench at roughly 750 degrees centigrade and a piece fired in a covered kiln at over 1,000. That was a skill she had picked up from the published methodology of Dr. Edward S. Morse, the American naturalist whose work on shell-mound ceramics had reached the Bryn Mawr laboratory through her department, and which she had refined in field study over the spring of 1887. On the afternoon of the 17th of October, that skill was the most useful thing she carried west. The depot clerk addressed her as __, quote, _0__, a courtesy of the frontier extended to any woman traveling alone, regardless of the truth of her marital condition. She did not correct him. She produced her appointment letter, signed by Dr. Lyle Pickering, director of the Tucson Territorial Museum, and asked for direction to the museum's wagon. The clerk pointed past the platform to a buckboard standing in the dust beyond the rails. The man on the buckboard was Calhoun Reeves. He was the museum's field foreman, by his own description, and he had served 3 years as a cattle hand on the Edwards outfit south of Tucson before Pickering had hired him into museum work. He was 36. He had a habit of speaking before he looked. He looked, now, at her walking suit. He looked at her 2 trunks, a leather hat box, and an oak cataloguing chest with brass corners. He looked at her hat, a Boston straw with a navy band, entirely wrong for the dry country. "Quote 1, he said. It was not a question. He spat to the side of the buckboard. He climbed down. He threw her cataloguing chest, the oak chest containing her father's loop and her preliminary notes on the Hohokam pieces from the Pennsylvania Academy, into the back of the buckboard from a height of perhaps 2 feet. The chest landed on its side. The brass corner that struck the boards left a small mark, visible from where she stood. She did not react. She walked around to the side of the buckboard and held out her gloved hand. Reeves looked at it. He did not at first understand what she was asking. After a count of perhaps 3 seconds, long enough for the depot clerk to look up, he took her hand and helped her into the seat. He did so badly. She arranged her skirt without comment and folded her hands in her lap. The drive along Stone Avenue took perhaps 8 minutes. Tucson, in October of 1888, was a town of approximately 8,000 persons, of which roughly 2/3 were of Mexican descent, with a smaller Anglo population, a Chinese community along the rail yard, and Tohono O'odham families who came in to trade from the south. The streets were a mixture of beaten dust and packed adobe. The air carried mesquite smoke from cook fires and the sharper edge of coal smoke from the depot. A church bell struck 3 times, the bell of San Agustin, although she did not yet know it by that name. Reeves talked. He talked about the Apache campaigns of '86. He talked about Geronimo's surrender at Skeleton Canyon. He had not been there, but he knew a man who had. He talked about Eastern misses who came out and did not last the dry season. He used the phrase dry season 4 times in 8 minutes. Whether for her benefit or because he had a limited vocabulary, the record on Reeves does not clearly say. She did not respond. She watched the street. She catalogued, by reflex, a Sonoran whitethorn at the corner of Stone and Pennington, a saguaro at the next block, what she believed to be a creosote shrub planted as ornamental in a courtyard. She catalogued because her father had taught her to catalogue. She catalogued now because it kept the part of her mind that wanted to look at Reeves with contempt sufficiently busy to prevent her from doing so. The Tucson Territorial Museum stood on the south side of Pennington Street, on the site of what had been, until 1883, a dry goods warehouse owned by the Edwards family of Tucson. Pickering had bought it for $1,600, refurbished the front rooms with display cases imported from St. Louis, and opened the institution to the public on the 1st of January, 1885. By the autumn of '88, it held perhaps 400 catalogued items, the bulk of them attributed to Apache, Hopi, or Hohokam provenance. Dr. Lyle Pickering met her in the front parlor. He was 47. He had taken his medical degree at the University of Pennsylvania in 1864, had served as a contract surgeon in the Army of the Potomac during the final months of the war, and had resigned his commission in '66 in favor of what he called ethnographic study, which had brought him, by various routes, to Arizona in '79. He was a thin man, with thinning hair the color of pewter, and he wore, Cora noted, with a small flicker that did not reach her face, a watch chain of unusual design across his waistcoat, with a fob in the shape of a Spanish silver real. He greeted her with formal politeness. He apologized for Reeves. He showed her into the central exhibition room. "The Apache collection," he said, with the slight pause that academic men use before words they wish to wait, "is the heart of our holdings." Cora walked along the central display case. The lighting was poor, a single gas mantle and the afternoon light through the south windows, but it was sufficient. She paused at the third case from the right. The case contained a single ceramic vessel. The label, in Pickering's hand on a white card, read, "Western Apache, ceremonial vessel, circa 1840, gift of T.J. Edwards, Esquire." The vessel was perhaps 8 inches in height. It was painted in a black on buff design that did not resemble any Western Apache pattern Cora had ever seen. The geometry was wrong, the proportion of the rim band was wrong, the slip at the lip had the small gloss characteristic of a kiln-fired piece, not the matte sheen of an open-trench Apache firing. She did not lean closer. She did not produce the loop in her purse. She did not stop her gloved finger on the glass. She looked at the vessel for perhaps 4 seconds. She moved on. "Quote 13, she said. She paused at the next case as well, a smaller piece, attributed to Hohokam, circa 900. This one was nearly correct. The clay body was thin enough, the slip was right, the wear on the foot ring suggested genuine antiquity. She suspected, but did not say, that the genuine Hohokam pieces were used by Pickering to validate the catalogue as a whole, while the forged pieces, the Apache pieces mostly, were sold quietly to Eastern museums for considerably more money. Pickering, behind her, did not move. After a beat, he said, "Quote 14, quote 15, quote 16, he said. Quote 17. She turned to the south window. The light was behind her. Pickering could not see her face clearly. Quote 18, she said. In the corner of the room, against the western wall, beside a case of cavalry-issue brass buttons from the 6th and the 10th, a man was standing. He had been there since before she arrived. He had not been introduced. He had not approached. She glanced at him only as she turned to follow Pickering toward the back office. He was perhaps 30. He wore a faded blue cavalry coat from which the regimental insignia had been removed, and a riding boot of the Western pattern. He had been listening to her conversation with Pickering. When her glance met his, he touched the brim of his hat once, a small, deliberate motion, and did not otherwise acknowledge her. She would learn his name from Aunt Hattie at the boarding house that evening. His name was Silas Macready. He had served 8 years in the 4th Cavalry, posted at Fort Huachuca in the last of them. He had ridden, in '86, as a scout with B Troop under Captain Henry Lawton in the column that pursued Geronimo through the Sierra Madre. He had been discharged in the spring of '87 at the rank of sergeant, with 3 months' back pay and a citation from the regimental commander. He had been working for Pickering as a part-time interpreter for 2 years. And on the afternoon of the 17th of October, when Cora glanced at him from the doorway of the back office of the Tucson Territorial Museum, he understood. Immediately, in a way he would later be unable to fully explain, that she had seen the same thing in the 3rd case that he had seen 6 months earlier and had not been able to prove. He did not move. He did not speak. Pickering closed the door of the back office. He sat behind a writing desk of light oak, opened a leather portfolio, and gave Cora the briefing he gave to all new arrivals. The museum's hours, the curatorial protocol, the social conventions of Tucson as he understood them, the names of 2 of the boarding houses considered appropriate. The briefing took 20 minutes. Cora listened. She wrote no notes. When she had been a student at Bryn Mawr, she had taken notes constantly, in a small ruled book with a brown cover. She had stopped that practice after her father's death, when she had begun, deliberately, to train her memory. At the end of the briefing, Pickering rose, walked her to the front door of the museum, and shook her gloved hand. "I am glad," he said, "that we have an educated woman with us. We have wanted one for some time. The cataloguing has been provincial." "Dr. Pickering?" "Yes?" "The vessel in the 3rd case, the one attributed to Western Apache, 1840, who collected it?" He hesitated for the space of perhaps a quarter of a second. "Mr. Edwards," he said, "of Tucson, a long-standing benefactor." "And the provenance, was it documented in the field or after acquisition?" A second pause. "It was documented by Mr. Edwards in writing at the time of his donation." "I see. Is there a difficulty?" "No, I was curious." She walked out into the afternoon. The light on Pennington Street was the deep gold of late October in the Sonoran basin, a light I have not, in my own travels, seen in any other part of the country, and which the writers of the 1880s referred to, often, as amber and honey, words I find inadequate. She walked the 4 blocks to Aunt Hattie's boarding house, with her dispatch case under her left arm and her right hand free. Aunt Hattie's boarding house on Convent Street had been kept by Mrs. Harriet Salisbury since 1876, and was the only establishment in Tucson in that year that took unaccompanied Eastern ladies. Cora's room was small, with whitewashed adobe walls and a single window facing east. The bed was iron-framed. The washstand was Mexican earthenware. A King James Bible lay on the side table. A small framed photograph of Mrs. Salisbury's late husband, killed at the Second Battle of Cold Harbor in 1864, stood beside it. Cora unpacked her trunks by lamplight. She set the oak cataloguing chest on the table by the window. The brass corner that Reeves had struck had a small dent. She opened the chest. Inside, padded in muslin, were her father's instruments, a Steinheil loop of 10 power, a brass caliper, a small ivory measuring rod, and a pocket field journal in which her father, in the last winter of his life, had taken notes on the pieces displayed at the Pennsylvania Academy. She turned to the page he had marked on the 11th of November, 1884. The handwriting was steady. The note read, quote 33. Her father had died of pneumonia in the second week of March, 1885. He had been 53 years old. She had been 20. She had been in the room when he had died. He had not spoken in the final 2 days. The note in the field journal was, in a sense she could not articulate to anyone, not to her mother, not to Miss Thomas at Bryn Mawr, not to the executor who handled the papers, his last instruction to her. She closed the journal. She closed the chest. She opened then the third letter, the sealed one. From the executor. It was dated the 22nd of September, 1888. It contained 2 pages. The first page was a routine notification that a final tranche of her father's estate had been dispersed to her mother. The second page was a copy of a letter sent by her cousin, Henry Whitcomb Lockwood, to the executor in late August, asking, with elaborate politeness, whether Cora had indicated any plans for foreign travel, and noting that the family had some concern, after recent troubles, for her stability of mind. She read the second page twice. Then she folded both pages, put them back into the envelope, and laid the envelope on top of her father's journal in the chest. She blew out the lamp. She did not sleep well. In the morning, before the bell of San Agustin had struck 6, she walked 2 streets east to the livery stable. The livery was operated by a man named Macready. She did not, at first sight, recognize him. He was in shirt sleeves. The cavalry coat hung on a peg behind the door. The early sun through the south window was on his face. 36, he said. He did not phrase it as a question. 38. He looked at her. He looked at the walking suit, which she had brushed clean the previous night. He looked at her hands, which were ungloved, and which had a small callus on the index and middle fingers of the right hand, from years of holding a steel scribe at the cataloguing bench. He said. He was silent for the length of perhaps 2 breaths. He turned toward the stalls. He said. He saddled the mare himself. He did not speak again until she was mounted. He adjusted her left stirrup by a single hole. She had not asked him to, and then stood back. He looked up at her against the morning sun. He touched the brim of his hat once. He did not say anything else. She turned the mare and rode east, out of Tucson into the desert, toward the closed dig at Tanque Verde, at 6:30 in the morning of the 18th of October, 1888. She carried in her dispatch case her father's loop, his pocket journal, and a single sheet of blank cataloguing paper. She had 11 days remaining before her fitness evaluation. She had not told Pickering she was going. She had not told the boarding house. She had not, in fact, told anyone in Tucson. She rode out alone, and the only witness to her departure was a man in a livery stable doorway, in shirt sleeves, who watched until the mare was a small shape against the eastern light, and who then turned and went back inside and began, without hurry, to saddle his own horse. The Tanque Verde dig site lay 7 miles east of Tucson, in a shallow drainage between 2 low ridges, where in some prior century, the records on this part are thin, a Hohokam farming community had cultivated maize, beans, and squash with the help of a shallow irrigation channel that ran northwest to southeast and was still, in 1888, visible from the higher of the 2 ridges as a slightly darker line in the soil. Cora arrived at the site at 9:20. She had expected to find it empty. Pickering had said the site was closed. The cataloguing tarps were tied down over the open trenches. The equipment shed was padlocked. She had expected the silence of a suspended excavation. She found Reeves there. He was sitting on an overturned crate against the south wall of the equipment shed, a tin cup of coffee in his hand and a Winchester 73 across his knees, watching the road. He stood when he saw her. He did not put down the rifle. 61. He did not move. The Winchester was across his thigh, not raised. Whether he would have raised it if she had ridden past him, the records of that morning, and they were, by Reeves's own later account, fragmentary, do not say. She did not ride past him. She dismounted. She tied the bay mare to the rail outside the shed. She walked to the nearest trench and looked down. The trench was perhaps 4 feet deep, 12 feet long, and 3 feet wide. The east wall had been excavated in level 12-inch stratigraphic increments. Competently, in fact. Whoever had done the trenching had been trained, or had been instructed by someone trained. At the third level, she could see a thin band of charcoal that suggested a hearth, and below that, the corner of what appeared to be a ceramic vessel, still in situ, perhaps half exposed. She took her father's loop from the dispatch case. She held it in her right hand, between thumb and forefinger, and walked the length of the trench, examining the sherd-bearing layer at 3 points. She did not lean down into the trench. She did not, on the 18th of October, 1888, descend into an open excavation in a walking suit at a site where the field foreman was holding a Winchester. She would, later in the week, descend into other trenches. She straightened. Quote 63, quote, she said, without turning to Reeves. Quote 64, quote, there was a pause. Quote 65, quote, Reeves said. Quote 66, quote 67, quote 68, quote. She did not turn. She made a small note in her field journal. The 18th, 10 o'clock, Tanque Verde, Trench A, charcoal at 3 feet, ceramic in situ at 3 feet 6, and closed the journal. She placed the loop back in the dispatch case. Behind her, on the road from Tucson, a rider was approaching at the easy lope of a man who is in no particular hurry, but is not wasting time either. It was Silas Macready. He drew up beside the equipment shed and dismounted. He looked at Reeves. Reeves looked at Silas. Neither of them said anything for the space of perhaps 4 seconds. Then Silas tied his horse, walked past Reeves without acknowledging him, and stopped beside Cora at the edge of the trench. Miss Lockwood. Mr. Macready. Pickering sent me out to ask you to come back. Did he? Yes. And what did you intend to say to me when you found me? A small pause. That the road back is a road, and that I was riding back to town in a little while, and that if you cared to ride with me, the mare you rented from me does better in company. I see. And that there is a creosote stand at the third wash where the water is good. You mentioned that yesterday. I did. Reeves had not moved from the shed. He was listening. Silas spoke a little louder than he otherwise might have, for Reeves's benefit. Quote 80, quote, he said. Quote 81, quote. Reeves frowned. Quote 82, quote 83, quote. Reeves looked at Silas for a long moment. Then he picked up his coffee cup, swore quietly, mounted his horse, and rode back toward Tucson at a pace markedly faster than the one Silas had used. When he was out of earshot, Silas turned to Cora. Quote 84, quote, he said. Quote 85, quote 86, quote 87, quote. He smiled, very slightly, the first time, in the brief period of their acquaintance, that she had seen him smile at all. He led her around the equipment shed to a low wooden box, padlocked, set on a flat stone. Quote 88, quote, he said. Quote 89, quote. He opened the box. Inside, padded-in newspaper from the Arizona Daily Citizen of the previous week were 3 ceramic sherds. They were grey on the interior, buff on the exterior, with traces of red slip on the rim of the largest piece. They had the patina of genuine antiquity, the slight chalky residue of long burial, the pitting of caliche, the small carbonaceous staining at the broken edges that comes from organic material decayed in situ. Cora took out the largest piece. She turned it in the morning light. She held the loop over the rim. She held it over the foot fracture. She held it over the slip. She said quietly. Silas listened. He asked it like a man who wanted the answer, not like a man making conversation. He looked at the piece. She paused. She had not been aware of doing so. She corrected herself. 100. She returned the sherd to the box. She said. He did not answer at first. He looked east toward the Rincon Mountains, which on the morning of the 18th were a dark grey against a paler grey sky. Quote 105, he said. Quote 106. Quote 107. Quote 108. He said this without raising his voice. He did not look at her while he said it. Quote 109, she asked. Quote 110. She closed the lid of the wooden box. Quote 111. Quote 112. She looked at him then. She was quiet for a moment. She watched the mountains. He listened. He did not interrupt her. He did not, when she had finished, make any commiserating remark. He said only, underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 120 underscore, 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 quote, underscore, 121 underscore, underscore. If you have come this far in a story about a Bryn Mawr fellow and a discharged cavalry sergeant in the Sonoran desert in 1888, and you came because you wanted the kind of story in which the woman walks into the dry country carrying a steel scribe and a sealed letter and refuses to be hurried, the small button beneath this video keeps these stories coming. That is all I will ask of you. The storm came at 2:30 in the afternoon. It came from the southwest, off the Tucson mountains, with the suddenness that the first frontal storms of southern Arizona sometimes have. A brown line on the horizon at 1 o'clock, an edge of wind by 2, and then a wall of rain that crossed the 7 miles between Tucson and Tanque Verde in under 20 minutes. Silas saw it first. We need to tarp the trenches. How many? 3 open. The 4th is covered. We have 2 tarpaulins in the shed. They worked. He undid the padlock, the key again from his pocket. They pulled the 2 heavy canvas sheets from the floor of the shed and dragged them across the open trenches. The wind picked up as they worked. The bay mare snorted at the rail. The second tarpaulin caught the wind once and lifted from Cora's grip, and Silas caught the corner without looking at her and pinned it under his boot until she could re-knot her side. Their hands met once, over the knot at the southeast corner of the second tarpaulin. The contact was the contact of 2 people tying a tarpaulin in a rising wind. It lasted perhaps 2 seconds. Neither of them remarked on it. Neither of them, in the days that followed, mentioned it to the other. I have spent some time wondering what either of them was thinking in those 2 seconds. The most honest answer is that they were both thinking about the tarpaulin. The rain came. They sheltered under the south overhang of the equipment shed, 3 feet apart, leaning against the adobe wall while the storm crossed the wash and moved east. It lasted, by Silas's pocket watch, a brass-cased Waltham, 1878, 3-jeweled, his discharge present from the regimental commander, 11 minutes. When it passed, the sky above Tanque Verde was that particular washed blue that follows a desert storm, and the smell of wet creosote was so strong that Cora, who had not on any previous occasion smelled wet creosote, would for the rest of her life associate the scent with the smell of the equipment shed, and with the specific weight of a man's coat sleeve a few inches from her own. They rode back to Tucson together. They did not talk much. He pointed out, at the third wash, the creosote stand and the canteen he had left there for her the previous afternoon. The canteen was still in place. She drank from it. He did not. He dropped her at Aunt Hattie's at 5 o'clock. He touched the brim of his hat once, said, quote, 125, and rode the mare back to the livery without looking over his shoulder. In the morning, before she had finished her coffee, the boy from the museum knocked on the parlor door of the boarding house. Dr. Pickering, the boy said, requested her presence in the back office at her earliest convenience. She walked the 4 blocks. The morning was clear and cold for the Sonoran basin in October. Pickering did not stand when she came in. He had a sheet of paper on the desk in front of him. He read from it without preamble. Quote, 126, quote, he said, quote, 127, quote, 128, quote, 129, quote, 130, quote, 131, quote, 132, quote. He looked at her for a long moment. He did not smile. Quote, 133, quote, he said, quote, 134, quote, 135, quote, 136, quote, 137, quote. She walked out. She walked to the Arizona Daily Citizen office on Congress Street and paid for a telegram to be sent that afternoon, eastbound, to Miss M. Carey Thomas, Dean's office, Bryn Mawr College, Pennsylvania. The telegram requested that the photographs of 3 pieces from the Pickering exhibit at the Pennsylvania Academy in 1885, pieces B6, B7, and B8 in the Lockwood Field Journal, be sent by overnight courier on the Wells, Fargo and Company Express route. She sent it under the name C. Lockwood, BMC. The telegraph clerk did not ask her what BMC meant. She walked from the Citizen office to the post office. There was a letter waiting for her from her mother. She read it on the bench outside the post office in the November sun. Her mother wrote that Henry, her cousin Henry, had called at the Charles Street house on 3 occasions in the previous month. He had asked, each time, after Cora's, quote, 138 and the duration of her stay in Arizona. He had been, her mother wrote, quote, 139. Her mother concluded the letter by saying that she had given Henry no particulars and would, henceforward, refer all his inquiries to the executor. She signed the letter quote, 140 and underlined the word quote, 141 with the small horizontal stroke she had used in letters since Cora's childhood. Cora folded the letter. She placed it in the inner pocket of her dispatch case beside the executor's letter from September. 2 days later, on the evening of the 22nd, the courier from Wells Fargo delivered a sealed packet to Aunt Hattie's boarding house. The packet contained 4 photographs, taken in March of 1885 at the Pennsylvania Academy, of 3 ceramic vessels Pickering had loaned to the Academy for exhibition that spring. Each photograph included a small-scale rule and a label in the hand of the Academy's photographer. Cora examined the photographs under the lamp on the table in her room. The 4th photograph was the one she had not asked for. It was a photograph of the underside of vessel B7. The Academy photographer, in 1885, had had the patience to turn the piece over and to photograph the foot, possibly at her father's request, and the photograph clearly showed, in the slight raking light, a small incised maker's mark on the underside, a diagonal cross, a dot above, a dot below. She set the photograph down. She put her hands on the table on either side of it. She did not in that moment weep. She had not wept for her father since the morning of his funeral in March of 1885, and she would not begin to do so now in the back room of a boarding house in Tucson. But she sat for some minutes with her hands flat on the table on either side of the photograph. And she said nothing aloud, and she did not move. On the morning of the 23rd, one day before the evaluation, Pickering sent the boy from the museum to invite her to a private preview viewing of the November exhibit. She accepted. She walked the 4 blocks. He met her in the central exhibition room. The November exhibit had been arranged in the central case. 6 pieces, including the vessel in the 3rd case, which had been moved to the center under a new label that read, Western Apache Ceremonial Vessel, circa 1840, on loan to the Fall Exhibition, November 15th. Pickering watched her. He was standing perhaps 4 feet to her left, with his hands behind his back, in the attitude of a man waiting to see a horse jump a wall. She produced her father's loop. She held it over the rim of the vessel. She held it over the slip. She turned then and walked around the case to the south side and crouched, in a walking suit, in the central exhibition room of the Tucson Territorial Museum at 10:30 in the morning of the 23rd of October, 1888, until she could see the underside of the vessel through the glass. She held the loop to the glass. The maker's mark was there, a diagonal cross, a dot above, a dot below. She straightened. Pickering was watching her face. She knew it. She did not look at him. She said. She walked slowly across the central exhibition room. She walked out of the museum onto Pennington Street. The door swung shut behind her. She did not, when the door closed, turn around to look at it. She walked 4 blocks in the bright Sonoran October light, in a walking suit that no longer smelled of Wanamaker, but of mesquite smoke and creosote, and the dust of a closed dig site at Tanque, Verde. She walked to the livery stable. She did not enter. She stood in the doorway of the livery stable, looking in, until Silas Macready, in shirt sleeves, came out of the back office. Quote 151, quote she said. Quote 152, quote he said. At 4:45 on the morning of the 24th of October, 1888, Cora Lockwood and Silas Macready walked together to the Southern Pacific Depot through the dark streets of Tucson. The lamp at the corner of Stone and Pennington was still burning. The first call of the rooster behind the church of San Agustin had not yet been made. The morning was cold, colder than she had expected of the Sonoran Basin in October, and her breath, when she exhaled, was briefly visible in the lamplight. She carried 3 letters. They were addressed, respectively, to Miss M. Carey Thomas, Dean's Office, Bryn Mawr College, to Major John Wesley Powell, Director, Bureau of Ethnology, Washington City, and to the Curator's Office, the Academy of Natural Sciences of Philadelphia, Logan Square. Each letter contained a 4-page summary of the case, in her hand, in steel nib ink, on the academic notepaper she had brought from Bryn Mawr. Each letter contained one of 4 copies she had made the previous night of the Penn Academy photograph of the underside of vessel B7, and each letter contained a transcript, in Silas Macready's hand, of the relevant entries from his interpreter's portfolio for the years 1886 and 1887. He had stayed up with her in the parlor of Aunt Hattie's boarding house until past 2 o'clock copying the entries. Mrs. Salisbury had set a candle on the table without comment and had not commented further. There were 3 coffee cups by the time the work was done. They posted the letters at the depot mail window. The eastbound train was due at 6. The clerk franked the 3 envelopes, stamped them for next day delivery from the next major junction, and sealed them into the eastbound mailbag in their presence. Silas said. They walked back as the sun came up. She was 24. No, she had turned 25 on the 12th of September, 3 weeks before her westbound train, and she had, in the press of the move, forgotten her own birthday entirely until her mother's letter of the 18th had reminded her. She was, that morning, 25 years and 42 days old. She would have, in the years that followed, a particular fondness for the small intervals of forgetting in a busy life. The board of the Tucson Territorial Museum convened at 9:30 in the museum's central exhibition room. There were 7 members. Pickering presided. The board comprised, in addition to Pickering, Mr. Selden Hughes, a Tucson attorney, 51, 2 terms as territorial legislator from Pima County; Judge Marcus Henley, 63, retired from the territorial bench in 1886; the Reverend Edmund Tate of the Episcopal Church on Stone Avenue, 44, who had founded a Sunday school in 1883 for the children of railroad workers; Mr. Theodore Larson, a Swedish-born merchant who operated 3 dry goods stores and a wagon works, 48; Mr. Lemuel Carrick, the Tucson postmaster and an amateur ornithologist, 57; and Mr. Thomas J. Edwards, 54, who owned the cattle outfit south of town and who was Pickering's brother-in-law by his marriage in 1872 to Pickering's sister Eliza. Pickering opened the proceedings with a routine summary of the museum's autumn acquisitions and a brief reference to an evaluation of cataloguing protocol that he had requested as part of Miss Lockwood's appointment. He turned to Cora. He was smiling. The smile did not reach his eyes. Quote, 156, quote, he said. Quote, 157, quote. She rose. She did not look at Pickering. She did not look at Edwards, who was seated at the south end of the long table with his hands folded over his stomach and a small, watchful expression. She looked at Hughes, who was the attorney. She looked at Judge Henley. She looked at Reverend Tate. She spoke to them as she would have spoken at a Bryn Mawr seminar on a question of academic record, quietly, with full sentences, without raising her voice above the level of comfortable speech in a small room. Quote, she said. She paused. She did not look at Pickering. She placed the photograph on the table. She sat down. There was a silence of perhaps 8 seconds. The clock on the south wall of the exhibition room, an 8-day pendulum clock of Hartford manufacture that had belonged to Mr. Larson's late father and had been gifted to the museum at its opening, ticked through the silence with what struck Cora, for the first time since she had entered the room, as an unusually steady beat. Pickering rose. Miss Lockwood, he said, I am sorry that you have chosen this morning to introduce a quite extraordinary set of accusations into what was scheduled as a routine evaluation. I would not, ordinarily, ask the board to hear my personal observations of an employee, but you have made it impossible to proceed otherwise. He took from his inside coat pocket a folded letter. He unfolded it. He placed it on the table. This letter, he said, was written to me on the 2nd of October by Mr. Henry Whitcomb Lockwood of Boston, who is Miss Lockwood's cousin and her family's nearest male relation. In it, Mr. Lockwood expresses, as a member of the Lockwood family, his concern for Miss Lockwood's stability of mind since the death of her father in '85. He notes that she has been, in his words, unable to accept the closure of that loss, and that he believes she has come to Arizona under the influence of what he calls an unwell preoccupation. I am sorry to make this letter public. I would not have if Miss Lockwood had not, this morning, made it necessary. He sat down. Reverend Tate looked at Cora. Judge Henley looked at Pickering. Hughes, the attorney, looked at the letter. Edwards, at the south end of the table, did not look at anyone. He was watching the door. The door opened. Silas Macready walked into the central exhibition room of the Tucson Territorial Museum at 37 minutes past 9 on the morning of the 24th of October, 1888, wearing his cavalry coat. The regimental insignia were still gone, but the coat had been brushed, and carrying under his left arm a leather-bound portfolio approximately 14 inches long and an inch and a half thick. He closed the door behind him. He walked to the long table. He did not address Pickering. He addressed Judge Henley. "Your Honor," he said, "my name is Silas Macready. I served 8 years in the 4th Cavalry, the last 2 as a scout with B Troop under Captain Henry Lawton in the campaigns against the Chiricahua and the Western Apache. I was discharged in May of 1887 at the rank of sergeant, with a citation that I will produce if it is required. I have served, in addition, as the part-time interpreter for the Tucson Territorial Museum since the autumn of 1886. I am the man whose name appears in Dr. Pickering's catalogue as Mr. S. Macready, interpreter, in the provenance notes for 47 items in this museum. I have, in this portfolio, my interpreter's notes for the same period." He placed the portfolio on the table. "Dr. Pickering does not speak Western Apache. He does not speak any dialect of Apache. He does not speak Yavapai. I have served as his interpreter at 16 interviews of Apache informants between October of 86 and August of 88. I can produce the names of the informants. The notes in this portfolio are my translations. Dr. Pickering's catalogue contains, in addition to those 47 items, 83 further items whose provenance is attributed to Apache speakers whom I never met. Those items do not appear in my notes. They cannot have appeared in any honest record of Apache testimony, because no Apache testimony was taken for them." He paused. He did not look at Pickering. "In addition, I knew the man whose pottery, on the road from Florence to Tucson, was taken in February of 1880. His name was Nautsuka. He was a friend of mine. The Territorial Marshal's file on the case is in the Records Building in Prescott. I have read it. The deputy who closed the file on the 3rd day was Mr. Thomas Edwards's second cousin, Patrick Edwards, who was at that time serving under appointment from Mr. Edwards's brother-in-law. The pottery from that wagon was sold to Dr. Pickering through Mr. Edwards's office in March of 1880. The receipts are in the museum's accession ledger for that month. Dr. Pickering attributed the pieces to Western Apache provenance. They were not." He stopped. He looked, finally, at Judge Henley. "Your Honor, I am a discharged sergeant of cavalry. The board is at liberty to take the testimony of Miss Lockwood, who is a Bryn Mawr Fellow, with a sealed letter of introduction from Miss M. Carey Thomas, as more authoritative than mine. I respectfully suggest, however, that the board take both." He stepped back from the table. He did not sit. There was, in fact, no chair for him to sit in. Hughes, the attorney, cleared his throat. "Dr. Pickering?" "Yes." "Have you a response?" Pickering's hands were on the table. They were perfectly still. The Spanish silver real on his watch fob caught the light from the south window. He said. Edwards spoke for the first time. He said. Hughes leaned forward. He said. Edwards opened his mouth. Judge Henley raised a single finger. Edwards closed his mouth. Henley said. He said. He said. Edwards stood. He left the room without addressing the board. He did not look at Cora as he passed her. He did not look at Silas. The Spanish silver real on Pickering's watch fob, when Pickering rose a moment later to follow Edwards out, struck the edge of the table once and made a small, bright sound. The bell of San Agustin was striking 10. Cora rode out to Tanque Verde with Silas in the late afternoon. They went the long way, north along the foot of the Catalinas, east past the old mission ruin at San Pedro de Picacho, and arrived at the dig site at 4:30, with the sun behind them and the Rincon Range turning copper in the late light. Reeves was not at the site. Reeves had, in fact, ridden out of Tucson by midday in the company of Pickering's hostler, on a route that nobody in Tucson would inquire after in any detail. There would later be, in the territorial newspapers, a brief report of a man fitting Reeves's description who was seen in Yuma at the end of October, but the report was not corroborated, and the trail, in the official record, ends there. Cora and Silas sat on the ridge above the dig site. They did not speak for some time. Below them, the open trenches were tarped. The equipment shed was padlocked. The bay mare was tied to the rail. Silas's grey gelding was tied beside her. I have stood on that ridge. The trenches are no longer visible. They were backfilled when the site was formally surveyed by the Bureau of Ethnology in 1893. But the irrigation channel can still be traced in the long afternoon light as a slightly darker line in the soil running northwest to southeast. The creosote at the foot of the ridge has grown taller since 1888. The smell after a rain is the same. He took off his hat. He took it off all the way. Not the touch of the brim he had given her on every previous occasion, but a full removal, holding it in both hands against the chest of his cavalry coat, in the manner of a man at a Charles Street parlor in Boston. He did this without looking at her. He did it as if it were a thing he had been meaning to do for a number of weeks, and had only now been able to arrange the time for. She took her father's loupe from the dispatch case. She held it out to him. "It was my father's," she said. "He bought it in Munich in 1863 on his wedding tour. He used it for 31 years. He used it on the piece in the Penn Academy on the 11th of November, 1884, and he did not use it again. It is the most useful instrument I own. I should like you to have it." He did not move at first. He looked at the loupe. "Miss Lockwood?" "My name is Cora." "Cora." "My friends, of which I have very few west of the Mississippi, call me Cora. The university friends I have on the East Coast call me Cora. My mother calls me Cora. My father called me Cora. There is no impropriety. There is, in fact, no other option." He took the loupe. "My name is Silas," he said. "My mother, she has been dead 9 years, called me Silas. My company in the 4th Cavalry called me Mac, because there were 3 Silases in the company. I have not been called Silas by anyone since June of '87. Silas. Cora." She did not lean toward him. She did not put her hand on his. She sat beside him on the ridge in a walking suit that had been cut at Wanamaker in the spring of '88 and that had, by the 24th of October,